Continuing the interview with Glenn Roseberry, missionary to Africa from Kingdom Driven Ministries. Today we're going to be talking about internet, how does he have internet, spiritual warfare, which I was really interested in, spiritual warfare in Africa. And he's also going to share a success story of a Muslim man that converted to Christianity. You're having coffee with Conrad.
Conrad rocks!
Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Conrad. This is Conrad from ConradRocks.net. This is going to be a ministry spotlight edition. We're continuing the interview with Glenn Roseberry, missionary to Africa, from kingdomdriven.org. In the first interview, Glenn explained about his passion for going to Africa and how God had specifically called him to do so. That's in part 1. In the second interview, Glenn explains what a day is like living in rural Africa as a missionary. And then I noticed that Glenn has quite a few posts on Facebook, and of course this prompted some questions about how he has access to the internet. So he's going to be talking about that today. Also, of course, I'm very curious about the reality of witch doctors in Africa and spiritual warfare. He's going to be talking about that today. And also, finally, he shares a success story of a man who converted from Islam, which is very prevalent where Glenn and his disciples evangelize. You may hear some chickens in the background and some people laughing in the background because, hey, he's on a farm in rural Africa. Keep in mind, it's kind of hard to get this podcast interview in such a remote area. So we use an app called Voxer, and basically Glenn answers questions that I have, and he talks about what he wants to when he can. So that's why this audio may sound a little strange. But without further ado, here is the interview with Glenn Roseberry, missionary to Africa.
You are going global for Jesus with ConradRocks.net.
My internet and electricity issues are really pretty simple. It was pretty problematic when I first came because, frankly, Tanzania's grid was really poor. Though I was living in Dar es Salaam, the largest city, and the lightest storm, would throw everything out. And plus the internet providers were relatively poor at doing their job. I've been here 6 years now. And just to give you an idea, I used Airtel, which was the big company owned out of India. And they did a pretty good job the first year I was here. And then a company named Safaricom kind of took over. And they do a far superior job. I lived in Dar es Salaam for about 6 months, and then I moved to the northern part of the country, which is called Arusha. And I lived there, and I lived in the bush, and I had no electricity, so it was a real challenge to keep anything charged up at all. So I was frequently having to, give my phone or give my iPad to somebody, and they would drive it into town and leave it plugged in a day, and then I could use it the next day. It was that kind of thing. And so anyway, but the reception was decent. But anyway, I finally put a solar unit, and I was able to keep mine charged. Immediately ran into the problem that all my neighbors found out I had a solar unit, and you're supposed to share in this culture. So I immediately had a line down my little dirt road of people wanting me to charge their phones, which I just was incapable of doing. So I added another panel so I could at least help 5 or 8 people a day, and I did that for a pretty good while. Right now, where I live, I have a rather adequate solar panel. I have a 60-watt, 230 watts, and a 15-watt, and I'm able to keep everything running pretty darn good, even during the rainy season. Our problem here is probably a single 60-watt would run anything I need in the summer, but in the winter months, or I should say in the rainy months, which, by the way, winter and summer is the opposite of you guys. In the rainy months, it's a real challenge. I mean, you could use 400 watts of power and still have days where it was, didn't do all that you wanted to do. Plus, as before, everyone wants to come because I have a solar panel and also share in the power. So it's not nice to be rude to neighbors. It's not even nice to say no here. So we do share and charge other people's devices as well. I don't really use the solar for both charging, which provides my internet. My connectivity is great with the internet here. I have 3G. When I get close to town, in just 15 minutes from here, I actually go to 4G, so it's pretty impressive. There are some dead spots from here and there, but Africa, because they weren't around when hardwired phones were doing so well, we didn't spend any money in infrastructure like the West did on telephone wires, lines, and poles, although there are some. So, it's kind of wide open for cellular phones and very popular here. We actually lead the world in doing commerce over phones. In other words, we have the highest percentage of people that actually bank on their phone and buy and sell on their phone. We even buy and sell stocks on our phone. How about that? It's the only thing that East Africa leads the world in. Phone banking. That's what happens when your local banks collapse every 10 or 15 years because of the economy. It turns out that it's safer to bank with with your telephone company. You're probably hearing laughing in the background. Normally you'd be hearing chickens clucking. I'm at my shamba, but we're having a missionary conference. Everybody's outside having a cup of tea because we have people from the UK, so they must have their spot of tea twice a day. And I thought I'd come inside and leave you guys this message and everything. So, internet's really good. And electricity is also good because of my solar panels. And when I'm in Nairobi, where I do a lot of work in the slums and also in the bush there, and I have a school there for children that's parents died of AIDS. Same thing's true. I have solar units and I have some electricity there as well. So you might be surprised. I think you would find probably the internet works about like it did in the United States 15 years ago. And electricity and all is very comparable, maybe the way it was in the United States 20 years ago. So if you can imagine a little bit of flux and a few more dead zones, not that bad a deal.
You're listening to an interview with Glenn Roseberry from kingdomdriven.org. Now we're going to be talking about spiritual warfare in Africa.
Spiritual warfare and witch doctors is something that I never thought I'd really have to deal with in Africa. Let me say, first of all, we do spiritual warfare all the time here. Paul tells us that in Ephesians 6 that, basically the devil has schemes against us, plans against us. So frankly, if you're not binding the devil and using the power of Jesus' name, you're cheating yourself and doing the devil a favor. But in our area, for example, we do have witch doctors. Tanzania has done a lot to stamp witch doctors out. The primary reason is that one of the problems we have with witch doctors is that they believe that by cutting off the limbs of albino children, they can bring people prosperity. So there is a huge market to catch children because, catching an adult is messy because he can identify you. So what you want to do if you're an evil witch doctor is you watch elementary schools and you try and get a kid off by himself and literally chop their hands, chop their leg, chop their arm off, chop their fingers off, whatever the spell calls for, and then they go and actually perform rituals with that people believe will help them do everything other than from cure diseases to ward off evil spirits and bring prosperity. And so, yes, we have real witch doctors, and we have real spiritual warfare here. I can't tell you the names of places because it's really not considered a good thing to do here to speak about places and name names. So let me just tell you of a story to where there was reports that they were finding bodies with parts missing. And all of a sudden, there were several bodies with parts missing, and the police went to investigate, and they got nowhere, and they actually sent the military. And when they got there, they called all the elders together, and the word on the street was some local witch doctors. They told some people that if they had parts from a human being, I believe it was the heart, and they ate part of that heart, that they would then be prosperous. And so, evidently, from the way the story is told, someone dug up a dead person and tasted their heart, and within a week came into quite a bit of money. And so another person heard about it, and they found a body that had recently died and cut into it, had a bite. And lo and behold, they prospered as well. Well, then all of a sudden, people that didn't have access to bodies, someone was actually killed. And then another was killed, and they began to spread. And the rumors were, whether they're true or not, people began to prosper greatly. And so the Army actually went up there, some officers did, and they called all the elders together and confronted them about it and said, what are you going to do? And they assured them they'd bring it to a stop, and then they stayed in the area about 2 weeks, and instead of stopping, it actually got worse. Then the police had an epiphany, and they called the elders together, and they said, we figured out why this horrible practice hasn't stopped. We've decided that you yourselves are participating in it. So they said, here's the new rule. And the rule is this: the next time we find a body or a person, and someone has removed an organ and it's gone, we are going to disappear one of you elders. We have a form of corporal punishment here that is capital punishment here that's very different than the West. If it's really common knowledge this person has done a crime, they get disappeared a lot, either by local vigilantes or even people that might be in authority. There have been some suspected terrorist people that disappeared. We've had thieves that were caught 3 times, caned each time, and when they were caught the 4th time, no one's ever seen them again. And their wives have been visited by elders and told to never ask about their husband, to never ask where he's at, and never discuss it with anyone. There will be no funeral, there will be no mourning, and do you have any questions? And if you have any needs, come see the elders, and we'll try to help you. So this kind of thing goes on. So basically they told the elders in this particular village, which, by the way, wasn't a village, it was a city, that if any more showed up, they were going to start disappearing elders. Guess what? The witchcraft problem was solved, the cannibalism problem was solved, and this happened in the last 24 months. Africa wants to put on a face of being a very modern and international city, and that it is. Cities like Nairobi and Dar es Salaam and certainly some of the most beautiful cities you've seen, amazing cities. I got a baby waking up. And all kinds of good things going on in Africa. At the same time, we still have this type of thing going on. I have brothers that routinely cast out demons and deliver people. And many times, though not possessed, Christians are oppressed or attacked by demons, and we deal with that as well. And people put curses on people, and we have to remove curses. I know this sounds so foreign to you. I hope I don't alienate you by telling you this, but I want you to know this is the reality in India, Indonesia, United States, in certain places, but very common in the developing world. I would even tell you among Muslims in Afghanistan, for example, I have friends that minister there, they are particularly susceptible to talismans and witchcraft, even though Islam is against it. It's not uncommon to lead someone to Jesus that is in Afghanistan, that is a Muslim, and then as you begin to go with them and talk to them and have them repentant of things, we always ask them if they're involved in witchcraft, and they will in fact reach right underneath their burqa and pull out items of witchcraft and also charms and talismans and things like this. So within Islam, within all the other religions of the world, and yes, within Christians here, we had a bishop in a neighboring country come clean and admit that he practiced witchcraft.
You are listening to an interview with Glenn Roseberry, missionary to Africa, from kingdomdriven.org. Now Glenn's going to be sharing a success story.
One of the first young men that I led to the Lord here was named Moody. I've ran into situations like Moody on more than one occasion. Moody grew up, his father was a very stern disciplinarian in Islam. Going to school as an Islamic person is brutal. They beat the kids pretty regular. Most Muslim fathers beat the kids pretty regular. And the school teachers beat the boys just frequently, the women as well, the girls as well. And so it's not a pleasant experience. So it's not unusual for Muslims when they get out of the Islamic run schools and get into, say, a public school and get around Christians and to not see them being beaten all the time and the harsh treatment that they give, that they immediately, as a young person, begin thinking, wow, Christianity's great, you don't get beat. I know that sounds like a simple thing, but trust me, it goes through every child's mind when they get around Christians, you know. And that's my experience here. I'm not saying that's the way Islam is everywhere. Islam is as different in different places as night and day. We met with Moody and we began sharing with him, and we led Moody to the Lord standing out in the middle of a field. We practice what we call Luke 10 evangelism. In Luke 10 evangelism, Jesus sent the 70 out 2 by 2 and told them what to do with very specific instructions. And we obey those instructions, and we go out looking for people that are what the Bible calls a person of peace. A person of peace, as the Bible describes it, is a person that extends hospitality. So to make things simple, we'll just say Moody was a person of peace, and we determined that because he was gracious and accepting when we came on his shamba, which is a family farm. He wanted to hear what we had to say with a big grin, and he was very interested. So a person of peace is a person that's open and interested in what you want to talk about. If you walk up to somebody to share with them and they say no, they haven't got time, you move on to the next person. But we go up to a person and actually ask them permission. May I share with you about Jesus and the kingdom of God? If they're your person of peace, then you are ready to go. And I actually have to get permission before I share with people. I know that sounds a little soft for folks, but it works like a charm. I don't waste my time with people that aren't interested, and God just puts people in my path all the time. Plus, hey, it's awfully easy to share with somebody who says they'd sure like to hear what you have to say. Doesn't that sound good? So Moody wanted to hear what we had to say, and we began to share with Moody, standing out in the middle of a field while he had a djembe in his hand, holding between the rows to get rid of the weeds. Moody lived right on the edge of the national park, and so one of his chores was to gather logs each night before the sun went down and get a smoldering fire going so the elephants wouldn't come eat his crops. So he let us know he only had about an hour and a half. So we shared with him about the Lord, prayed with him right there. He repented of his sins and decided he wanted to follow Jesus. Over the course of the next month or two, he came to my house. I taught him daily, provided him with some literature as well, but I taught him every single day. We ate together, spent time together, fellowship together. Oddly enough, I find that Muslims struggle sometimes with coming to Christian meetings that are formal with other Christians because there is this aspect when somebody comes from Islam that they have not only abandoned Islam, they've abandoned their family, they've forsaken their country. It's viewed as a real betrayal thing. And I have found that just wholesale coming to a meeting where it's all Christians is a real struggle. It's always best if you can get some other Muslims for them to meet with that have come to Christ. For some reason, they're much more comfortable with that. So, and after about 2 months of meeting with Moody and discipling Moody, he just disappeared. He got off at a really good job far away and went to work for somebody, and I didn't see him for about 6 months, and he shows back up and wants to pick up right where he left off, and that's what we did. And Moody, turns out, spoke pretty good English, so he started doing a little interpreting for me. Moody his father had abandoned his family at a very young age, and Moody just needed a father figure. And at the time, I was working between Arusha area in Tanzania and the Nairobi area in the slums up there. So I was spending half my time in each place, and I realized after Moody being gone for a whole 4 to 6 months on that job he had, he just couldn't afford for me then to turn around after only another month or two with him and leave again. So I had a brother that I was walking with at the time, and I just kind of got them together and told them I wanted to be Paul and Timothy, and that's what they did. And so for the next 3 months while I was gone, they just worked side by side on each other's farms and just got close in the Lord. And then I came back and I worked with Moody and wound up, he introduced me to the rest of his family. I think we baptized about 8 out of 10 people that's in his family now. And they're also walking with us and meeting in one house church. It's like this whole house church is about 70% of Moody's family members. Oddly enough, Moody doesn't go to that one. He goes to some other house churches, and I hold that house church. But anyway, Moody works with another brother that we also led the North named Benny, who came from Catholicism. And I've trained them to do Luke 10 evangelism. And so Mondays and Fridays, they work all day long on our farm here to earn wages for themselves. And then they work half a day Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then they take the second half of the day and they go out and do 2x2 evangelism using the Luke 10 model. So Moody now is going out using the same method that was used to locate and share with him, and he is locating and sharing with other people. We are baptizing people. He is at the point now to where he's primarily more of an evangelist type. He finds the person of peace and initiates things, and other brothers that have been in the Lord longer teach them and would probably baptize them. But I anticipate within the next 6 months that Moody will actually be baptizing people as well. He's a young man in his early 20s. In this culture, a man must be married and have children before he's considered a real man. And so he's married. We're hoping for children soon, but he will be viewed different by the culture here after he has a child. In this culture, until a man is married and has a child, he's basically Kijandi. He's a boy. And so identities here are very much wrapped up in families. And so the ability to lead older people or more mature people to the Lord is a little bit restricted now culturally. So he leads young men to the Lord. He's great at it. Moody just happens to look like a bodybuilder, which is real rare here. You know, we get very, very little nutrition and all. And there's a joke in our village when somebody says somebody's strong, they go, "Is he strong like Moody?" Because Moody's, this bulging muscle kind of guy. And so, as it turns out, a lot of young men look up to him, and people listen to him. And so, young athletic men in particular like to talk to Moody because he's very athletic and these kind of things. And it kind of makes it easy for him to witness with young people because so many young men admire him because he's such an exception in our malnourished area. So, Moody's out sharing his faith with Benny, leading people to the Lord. And also do a lot of interpretation work for us. So there's your successful discipleship story from Islam, a person that had started wondering what it's like to be a Christian when he's 8 or 9 years old. I left one important part out of that equation, is that Moody had always wanted someone to tell him how to become a Christian. In other words, he not only was curious about Christianity, but really wanted somebody to tell him about Christ, and no one ever would. And he always wondered, how do I become a Christian? I want to share with you that has happened to me about 5 times since I've come to this country. And I'll be out sharing my faith, and I'll meet a Muslim, and they say, I always wanted someone to tell me how to become a Christian. I've heard the songs. I've heard the prayers. Even Muslims know that the God of the Christians answers prayers. Even Muslims know that Christians pray to be healed, and they're healed, and Allah does not heal. And Allah does not seem to answer prayers. And Christians say that they know God, and we don't know God. We don't know Allah. He's unknowable. And so I just wanted somebody to tell me how I could become a Christian, and no one ever would. As it turns out, I was the first guy that ever told him how to become a Christian. And he'd been waiting on me since he was about 10 or 12 years old. So that's happened to me about 5 times. They're just waiting on somebody to tell them about Jesus. Lord bless you.
Now, wasn't that amazing? In the last and final interview, Glenn is going to be talking about persecution in the countries of Africa, where Glenn and his disciples have experienced persecution firsthand in some of his friends. If you would like to support Glenn or follow Glenn on social media, I'm going to include the link to his Facebook personal page and the link to his website so you can follow him and support him as well. Stay tuned. The last podcast will be about persecution. Thank you for being in my life. Until we meet again, dig deeper and go higher.
Dig deeper, go higher at ComradeRocks.net.